Let's go back to just close the loop on the inner voice and the benefits that it provides. So we talked about two: verbal working memory, right? Keeping verbal information active for short periods of time. And we talked about simulating and planning things, like going over what you're going to say before an interview or an important presentation. Let's turn to self-control and motivation. So you exercise, because you've talked about exercising.
Yeah, I try to exercise 6 days a week, although some are short workouts, some are longer. Yeah.
You ever talk to yourself when you exercise?
Oh, all the time.
So let's hear it. The world wants to know, Andrew, what do you say to yourself when you exercise?
Depends on how well rested I am, how motivated I am. I'll give two examples at the opposite poles of the motivational scale. I was traveling 2 weeks ago, and I was doing some exercises for there's a muscle on the back of the shoulder, the rear deltoid. It's I don't think anyone's favorite muscle to train, but it's a very important one.
That's when you do this one.
You're right, for shoulder posture and stability, and got to train that muscle group, because otherwise people tend to get this inward rotating, like, thumbs pointing toward belly button and shoulders rolling forward thing. And there are a number of reasons why it's important. So you got to do the rear delt thing. And I sat down to do the first work set after a couple warm-ups, and I remember thinking, like, I love training. I have since I started training when I was 16. And I thought to myself, for some reason, I don't want to do this morning. And then I thought, okay, David Goggins would probably start swearing at himself in his head. So I started that a little bit. And that didn't really work for me. Sorry, David. And then I thought, I'm going to go through every possible inner voice I can think of. So I heard Jocko Willink's voice. I'm friends with Jocko, and heard him just saying, like, yeah, whatever, you're just weak, or just like, do it anyway kind of mentality. And I just started cycling through all of them. And I made a deal with myself that when I ran out of voices to use, that's when I would stop the set. And I probably tripled the number of repetitions that I would normally get with that weight. Amazing. So it was like one part motivation, one part distraction, one part frustration. And I was just pulling from the catalog of possible voices of kind of coach-like voices. Yeah. And it worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
And then at the other extreme, I can recall many times, because I put effort into it, where I'm well rested, I'm hydrated, get appropriate amounts of caffeine in my system, which I love, and I sit down to train, and I absolutely love to train under those conditions. The sun is shining, music's playing, and I just remember this was during this was a leg day, always the hardest day, set of heavy hack squats, and just thinking, I love this. But I have this inner voice where every time I start a repetition, I go through a thing where I brace my midsection so I don't hurt my back. And I always look directly at the ceiling, and I think about my bulldog Costello. And I think, I'm going to do this one for you. I'm going to do this one for you. And I know at those moments, my inner voice goes to, he would probably just be sitting there like, why are you working this hard? Bulldogs don't like to work. So I'm not really in a complete sentence generation inner voice kind of thing.
But you have a very rich inner world, right? Your verbal working memory stream is filled with words when you are working out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this. I was going to ask you this later in the episode, but maybe it's relevant now. I think it is. When I was a kid, after my parents would tuck me in to go to sleep at night, I used to lie in bed and rehearse voices that I had heard throughout the day. And I felt like I could hear them in their tone of voice. And then I'd make them say different things just for my own entertainment. So I could have them say whatever I wanted, but in a particular voice. And my friends sometimes tease me that I'll give people voices, like I'll give someone like a Marge Simpson voice or something. They're like, she doesn't sound like that at all, but I'll just sort of create a narrative in my mind. So a lot of chatter in there, a lot of voices.
Yeah.
But not super organized. It's not like I'm constructing a play. It's kind of, it feels like things geyser up. I toy with them, maybe but it's kind of a mishmash. It's not super regimented. These aren't complete sentences.
Well, one of the reasons why the Pennybaker effect is believed to be so useful is because it imposes a structure on the stream going through our head, which is oftentimes not organized. And when you find that inner verbal stream going in the negative direction, so negative self-talk, so the chatter, right? You're an idiot, such an idiot, or you're looping over a problem without making any progress. Putting those words in, actually taking that inner stream and making a story out of it is essentially what the Pennybaker writing cues you to do, because we are taught when we write in sentences. There's a structure to our writing that we impose on our thinking. Up here in our minds, it's a free-for-all. It can go in all sorts of directions, and that chaos is in part what can make chatter so aversive.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Our very first guest ever on this podcast was a guy named Carl Deisseroth. He's a bioengineer. He's a practicing psychiatrist. He's one of the luminaries of neuroscience. He developed these light-sensitive channels to be able to manipulate neurons in animal models, but also now in human clinical work as well. And one thing that he shared was that after he puts his kids to sleep, I think now they're grown, but in the evening, he'll deliberately sit still, completely bodily still, close his eyes, and force himself to think in complete sentences for maybe an hour or so, maybe more. And I thought to myself, wow, like that's a very disciplined practice. It also speaks to what you're saying, which is that typically thinking in complete sentences is not the default of the mind. So I don't know what his specific reason for doing that is. He shared a few of them on that podcast episode, but I'm sure there are others as well. But I tried it. It's very difficult to, especially with eyes closed, to not drift into multiple narratives. Kind of the stream sort of split into tributaries, and then it sort of you dissolve into sleep or kind of
meditation experience.
Yeah, almost dreamlike state where you're these liminal states.
Yeah. Well, that's I think where the writing provides a tool to structure your thinking. Talking has a similar modality. So when we talk to people, there is a structure to the way we converse, where we're not, if I were to just talk to you the way I pinball in my mind, you wouldn't be able to understand me, and you would think I'm out of my bleeping mind, right? Because I would be unable to have a meaningful conversation with you. So there's some research which shows that if you get people to think of, to recall a chatter-provoking experience, so think about something negative that's happened to you, and then you randomly assign them to just think about it and work it through in their mind versus write about it, so i.e. a Pennybaker writing-like condition, or talk about it to someone else. The talking and the writing both do better in terms of how they feel when they're done as compared to the just thinking, because there's no guardrails to the way we think. That we are taught, I should add, because we're going to give people guardrails later in this episode.
So in addition to using the Pennybaker approach, and by the way, we'll provide a link to some resources for the Pennybaker journaling, because there's some free online resources that I think are really powerful for people to use if they want to use that as a template. For cathartic reasons, or just get one's mind around a problem, or something I'm very familiar with, waking up and just feeling like everything is kind of not a storm in there, but a bit too disorganized to get my head right. You know, and so I need things to get my head right. Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's writing. Sounds like journaling is just a really useful practice overall.
It's a useful practice, and it's an underutilized practice. So we did 2 pretty large studies during COVID to look at how are people regulating their emotions on a daily basis to deal with the anxiety surrounding COVID. And we gave them a series of tools that they could check off if they used the tools that day. And we learned a couple of really interesting things. Number one, there are no one-size-fits-all solutions for folks. So remarkable variability characterized the tools that worked for person A versus person B. Number two, it was seldom the case that people used one tool. In general, people used on average 3 or 4 tools each day, which I think is another really important take-home, because I am often asked, as for example, what is my favorite tool for managing emotions? I don't have a favorite tool, because I'm typically using multiple tools, and most people are doing exactly the same. So it's kind of like what we're learning about emotion regulation is, in some ways, it's similar to physical exercise. You're not only going to work out your rear deltoids with the same exercise every day. You would have like funky looking shoulders if you did, right? And you'd probably be pretty weak in lots of other parts of your body. You're doing multiple things, and the multiple things that you do to exercise, I'm guessing, are different from the multiple things that I do to exercise, Yet we may well be equally fit. Well, you may be a little bit more fit than me, but
I doubt it.
You get the drift. So there's this beautiful variability to how we manage our inner worlds. To bring it back to expressive writing, we found that expressive writing, when people used it, was really, really useful. It moved the needle on their COVID anxiety, but it was an underutilized tool. People didn't do it very much. And I think that's in part because it is somewhat effortful.